David, welcome to the Gastric Health Show and excited to have you. And if you could maybe share a little bit about your story and kind of the background of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. I'll start in childhood if that's okay, because I think that's where it started for me. Is I used to come home from school, and like in the winter, I'd have like hat and gloves on, a backpack, a parka, right? I just run down the stairs. I hit the pantry. I grab like 5 bags of fruit snacks, and I'd hide the wrappers. And I
Oh,
couldn't really explain that. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I did it.
yeah.
It turns out later, my mom ended up identifying initially as a compulsive overeater and then identifying as a food addict. And so I think that had a big thing to do with my childhood and just kind of being around that. And definitely, I think I have a genetic disposition to food and sugar addiction. So I think that's a big part of it. I mean, if you shake my family tree, a bunch of addicts fall out. It's just the reality. So
Yeah.
definitely the genetic piece is really strong. And then ultimately, let's see, I always love to cook. I love feeding people. My whole family, they're feeders. They'll like watch you eat. They just want to please you with food. So I went to culinary school. Then I was sort of on a whim, I decided to apply to get my master's and do a dietetic internship.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I just thought that would help me help people better.
Right.
And so I went through that program. I ended up in Ohio State, and I did the program there. And then I was working initially in an ICU. I was helping people really with enteral nutrition support, tube feeding. I moved back to Boston and started working in a bariatric center, and helping people get prepared for bariatric surgery.
Right.
And I think that's when I was finally given the opportunity to work with addicts. And
Yep.
then as a result of that, I've started my own personal recovery journey. And actually, my own personal recovery journey actually started when I stopped working there.
Yep.
And that was the impetus to kind of take a look at my life and
Mm.
change a lot of things. And
Mhm.
that pretty much brings me up to speed now, where I run a addiction community online, which is called Sugar Global. And it's a community-based platform. We run groups and things like that, but we're really
Yeah.
helping people get in on the ground floor so they build a life that they love.
You get kind of confused. It's so confusing because no one's really talking about food addiction really is real. And maybe this is a small piece of what you're missing in your healing part after weight loss surgery. And that's because no one's really talking about this. So I think, how do you define sugar addiction?
Well, it's a hard question to answer. There's a couple things that we can use. We can take a look at the substance abuse criteria. And so there are some characteristics that help people diagnose substance abuse disorder. Some
Okay.
of them are things like use despite consequences. Like we
Okay.
continue to use even though it starts to complicate our life.
Mm-hmm.
Consequences could be on a physical paradigm. They could be like affecting our body, affecting our weight. They could be on an emotional paradigm. They could be
Mm-hmm.
on a social paradigm. They affect the relationships that we have. Like, do you have any relationships in your life that have been impacted negatively by the way that you continue to use or abuse food?
Yeah.
That's one way to look at it. Withdrawal or tolerance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you need more than you needed before to get the same effect?
Mm-hmm.
And then withdrawal is what happens to you physically, psychologically, emotionally when you stop using. Some of the symptoms would be like have you given up some of the social parts of your life so that you could use food instead? Have you eaten more than you intended to? Have you eaten for longer than you intended to? Have you continued to use sugar even though a medical professional has urged you to do otherwise? Those
Yeah.
are like a few of them.
Okay.
So it, yeah, and the symptoms as they accrue, they don't go away,
Yeah.
right? They're either dormant or they're active.
Yep.
So if you enter a period of recovery or dormancy or abstinence, really,
Yep.
from the substance, the behaviors may subside, but when you return to active use, the symptoms return. They don't come in a staggered way. They'll return all at once.
Do you kind of qualify a sugar addiction the same as alcohol, drugs, sex? I mean, how do you differentiate, or is there a difference? Are they all the same?
I look at it like it's an outlet. So if I'm a sugar addict, my outlet is sugar.
Mm-hmm.
If I transfer to alcoholism, then my outlet is alcohol. But the addiction doesn't change. It's just the substance and the behavior changes.
Yeah.
So we say one disease, many outlets. So generally speaking, most addicts have multiple outlets. The reality is that they just don't see them until one of them goes away, and you kind of end up playing a little bit of whack-a-mole. The other thing I think we really need to look at is this biopsychosocial piece, which is addiction affects me biologically. It affects my physical body. It
Yep.
affects the way my brain operates. It affects on a chemical level.
Yep.
Socially, it affects my relationships. When I interact with another person, that's affected by the nature of my disease.
Yep.
Psychologically, it affects the way I think and it affects the way I feel.
Mm-hmm.
And it affects me spiritually. It affects the way I interact with the universe. So we have to come up with these simple things that can kind of sink into that part of the brain that can be simple reminders. But I think the other thing is that we can actually repair the brain. Like we can create new pathways that are different. And how we do that is by doing things over and over again. You're going to have to act your way out of it. And so just by doing these simple behaviors over again and being around other people that are doing the same kinds of behaviors, not necessarily the exact same thing, it helps us to mirror it, to mimic it, and we're not feeling like an outsider. We're not relying as much on willpower because it's in our environment now. People are like, we can normalize recovery.